So welcome everyone. This is a reading of Steve Albini's The Problem of Music, which appeared in Maximum Rock and Roll, issue number 133 in 1993. And the journalist Monica Tan has given us a bit of background on this in a Guardian article. And it goes as follows. Monica Tan says, or wrote, Albini was 31 at the time and had considerable experience in the music world as a musician, an engineer, and perhaps most importantly, as a consummate fan of and evangelist for talented musicians. His essay was not a broad anti-corporation rant. There's no high-flying ideology, but highlighted specific gripes, illustrated by his personal experiences. The industry, as it was then, was dominated by the big labels and the bloated middlemen who exploited the music of generally poorly paid musicians, resulting in a lack of choice for consumers. So here we go, Steve Albini. Whenever I talk to a band who are about to sign up to a major label, I always end up thinking of them in a particular context. I imagine a trench about 4 feet wide and 5 feet deep, maybe 60 yards long, filled with runny, decaying shit. I imagine these people, some of them good friends, some of them barely acquaintances, at one end of this trench. I also imagine a faceless industry lackey at the other end holding a fountain pen and a contract waiting to be signed. Nobody can see what's printed on the contract. It's too far away. And besides, the shit stench is making everybody's eyes water. The lackey shouts to everyone that the first one to swim the trench gets to sign the contract. Everybody dives in the trench and they struggle furiously to get to the other end. 2 people arrive simultaneously and begin wrestling furiously, clawing each other and dunking each other under the shit. Eventually, one of them capitulates and there's only one contestant left. He reaches for the pen, but the lackey says, actually, I think you need a little more development. Swim again, please. Backstroke. And he does, of course. A&R scouts. Every major label involved in the hunt for new bands now has on staff a high-profile point man, an A&R rep, who can represent a comfortable face to any prospective band. The initials stand for artist and repertoire because historically the A&R staff would select artists to record music that they had also selected out of an available pool of each. This is still the case, though not openly. These guys are universally young, about the same age as the bands being wooed, and nowadays they always have some dubious underground rock credibility flag they can wave. Lyle Pressler, former guitarist for Minor Threat, is one of them. Terry Tolkien, former New York independent booking agent and assistant manager at Touch and Go, is one of them. Al Smith, former soundman at CBGB, is one of them. Mike Gitter, former editor of XXX fanzine and contributor to Rip, Kerrang and other lowbrow rags, is one of them. Many of the annoying turds who used to staff college radio stations are in their ranks as well. There are several reasons A&R scouts are always young. The explanation usually copped to is that the scout will be hip to the current musical scene. A more important reason is that the bands will intuitively trust someone they think is a peer and who speaks fondly of the same formative rock and roll experiences. The A&R person is the first person to make contact with the band and as such is the first person to promise you the moon, or promise them the moon. Who better to promise them the moon than an idealistic young Turk who expects to be calling the shots in a few years and who has no previous experience with a big record company. Hell, he's naive. He's as naive as the band he's duping. When he tells them no one will interfere in their creative process, he probably even believes it. When he sits down with the band for the first time over a plate of angel hair pasta, he can tell them with all sincerity that when they sign with Company X, they're really signing with him and he's on their side. Remember that grey gig I saw you in 85? Didn't we have a blast? By now, all rock bands are wise enough to be suspicious of music industry scum. There is a pervasive caricature in popular culture of a portly, middle-aged ex-hipster talking a mile a minute, using outdated jargon and calling everyone baby. After meeting their A&R guy, the band will say to themselves and everybody else, "He's not like the record company guy at all. He's like one of us," and they will be right. That's one of the reasons he was hired. These A&R guys are not allowed to write contracts. What they do is present the band with a letter of intent, a deal memo, which loosely states some terms and affirms that the band will sign with the label once a contract has been agreed upon. The spookiest thing about this harmless sounding little memo is that it is, for all legal purposes, a binding document. That is, once the band signs it, they are under obligation to conclude a deal with the label. If the label presents them with a contract that the band don't want to sign, all the label has to do is wait. There are 100 other bands willing to sign the exact same contract, so the label is in a position of strength. These letters never have any terms of expiration, so the band remain bound by the real demo until a contract is signed, no matter how long that takes. The band cannot sign to another label, even put out its own material unless they are released for their agreement, which never happens. Make no mistake about it, once a band has signed a letter of intent, they will either eventually sign a contract that suits the label or they will be destroyed. One of my favourite bands was held hostage for the better part of 2 years by a slick young, he's not a label guy at all, A&R rep on the basis of such a real memo. He had failed to come through on any of the promises. Something he did was similar effect to another well-known band, and so the band wanted out. Another label expressed interest, but when the A&R man was asked to release the band, he said he would need money or points, or possibly both, before he could consider it. The new label was afraid the price would be too dear, and they said no thanks. On the cusp of making their signature album, an excellent band, humiliated, broke up from the stress and the many months of inactivity. What I hate about recording. Producers and engineers who use meaningless words to make their clients think they know what's going on, like punchy, warm, groove, vibe, feel, especially punchy and warm. Well, every time I hear those words, I want to throttle somebody. Producers who aren't also engineers and as such don't have the slightest fucking idea what they're doing in a studio besides taking it all the time. Historically, the progression of effort required to become a producer went like this. Go to college, get an electrical engineering degree, get a job as an assistant at a studio, eventually become a second engineer, learn the job and become an engineer. Do that for a few years, then you can try your hand at producing. Now, all that's required to be a full-fledged producer is the gall it takes to claim to be one. Calling people like Don Fleming, Al Jurgensen, Lee Ranaldo or Jerry Harrison producers in the traditional sense is akin to calling Bernie a shortstop because he watched the whole playoffs this year. The term has taken on pejorative qualities in some circles. Engineers tell jokes about producers the way people back in Montana tell jokes about North Dakotans. How many producers does it take to change a light bulb? I don't know. What do you think? Why did the producer cross the road? Because that's the way the Beatles did it, man. That's why few self-respecting engineers will allow themselves to be called producers. Trendy electronics and other flashy shit that nobody really needs. 5 years ago, everything everywhere was being done with discrete samples. No actual drumming allowed on most records. Samples only. The next trend was Pultec equalizers. Everything had to be run through Pultec EQs. Then vintage microphones were all the rage, but only Neumann's, the most annoyingly whiny microphone line ever made. The current trendy thing is compression by the ton, especially if it comes from a tube limiter. Wow. It doesn't matter how awful the recording is, as long as it goes through a tube limiter, somebody who claims it sounds warm, or maybe even punchy. Someone will claim this. They might even compare it to the Beatles. I want to find the guy that's invented compression and tear his liver out. I hate it. It makes everything sound like a beer commercial. DAT machines. They sound like shit And every crappy studio has one now because they're so cheap. Because the crappy engineers that inhabit crappy studios are too thick to learn how to align and maintain analog mastering tracks. They're all using DAT machines exclusively. DAT tapes deteriorate over time, and when they do, the information on them is lost forever. I have personally seen tapes go irretrievably bad in less than a month. Using them for final masters is almost fraudulently irresponsible. Tape machines ought to be big and cumbersome and difficult to use, if only to keep the riff-raff out. DAT machines make it possible for morons to make a living and damage to the music we all have to listen to. Trying to sound like the Beatles. Every record I hear these days has incredibly loud, compressed vocals and a quiet little murmur of a rock band in the background. The excuse given by producers for inflicting such an imbalance on a rock band is that it makes the record sound more like the Beatles. Yeah, right. Fuck's sake, Thurston Moore is not Paul McCartney, and nobody on earth, not with unlimited time and resources, could make the Smashing Pumpkins sound like the Beatles. Trying just makes them seem even dumber. Why can't people try to sound like the Smash Chords or Metal Urbane or Third World War for a change? The minimum skills required to do an adequate job recording an album are working knowledge of all the microphones at hand and their properties and uses. I mean, something beyond knowing that you can drop an SM57 without breaking it. Experience with every piece of equipment that might be of use at every function and every function it may provide. This means more than knowing what echo sounds like, which equalizer has the least phase shift in neighbour bands, which console has more headroom, which mastering track has the cleanest output electronics. Experience with the style of music at hand to know when obvious blunders are occurring. Ability to tune and maintain all the required instruments and electronics so as to ensure that everything is in proper working order. This means more than plugging a guitar into a tuner. How should the drums be tuned to simulate a rising note on the decay, a falling note, a consonant note? Can a bassoon play a concert E flat in key with the piano tuned to a reference A of 440 Hz? What percentage of varispeed is necessary to make a whole tone pitch change? What degree of overbias gives you the most headroom at 10 kHz? What reference fluxivity gives you the lowest self-noise from biased unrecorded tape? Which tape manufacturer closes every year in July, causing shortages of tape globally? What can be done for a shedding master tape? A sticky one. Knowledge of electronic circuits to an extent that will allow selection of appropriate signal paths. This means more than knowing the difference between a delay line and an equalizer. Which has more headroom? A discrete Class A microphone preamp with transformer output, or a differential circuit built with monolithics? What is the best place in an unbalanced line to attenuate the signal? If you short the cold leg of a differential input to the ground, what happens to the signal level? Which gain control device has the least distortion, a VCA, a printed plastic pot, a photoresistor, or a wire-wound stepped attenuator? Will putting an unbalanced line on a half-normal jack unbalance the normal signal path? Will a transformer splitter load the input to a device parallel to it? Which will have less RF noise, a shielded, unbalanced line, or a balanced line with a floated shield? An aesthetic that is well-rooted and compatible with the music, and the good taste to know when to exercise it. There's this band. They're pretty ordinary, but they're also pretty good, so they've attracted some attention. They've signed to a moderate-sized independent label by a distribution company, and they have another 2 albums owed to the label. They're a little ambitious. They'd like to get signed by a major label so they can have some security, get some good equipment, tour in a proper tour bus, nothing fancy, just a little reward for all the hard work. To that end, they got a manager. He knows some of the label guys and he can shop their next product to all the right people. He takes his cut, sure, but it's only 15%. And if he can get them signed, then it's money well spent. Anyways, it doesn't cost them anything if it doesn't work. 15% of nothing isn't much. One day, an A&R scout calls them, says he's been following them for a while now, and when their manager mentioned them to him, it just clicked. Would they like to meet him about the possibility of working out a deal with his label? Wow. Big break time. They meet the guy, and you know what? He's not what they expected from a label guy. He's young and dresses pretty much like the band does. He knows all their favourite bands. He's like one of them. He tells them he wants to go to bat for them, to try to get them everything they want. He says everything is possible with the right attitude. They conclude the evening by taking home a copy of a deal memo they wrote out and signed on the spot. The A&R guy was full of great ideas, even talked about using a name producer. Butch figures out of the question he wants 100 G's and 3 points, but they can get Don Fleming for 30 grand plus 3 points. Even that's a little steep, so maybe they'll go with that guy who used to be in David Letterman's band. He only wants 3 points. Or they can just have anybody record it, like Wharton Tears, maybe cost you 5 or 7 grand, and have Andy Wallace remix it for 4 grand a track plus 2 points. It was a lot to think about. Well, they like this guy and they trust him. Besides, they already agreed to the deal memo. He must have been serious about wanting them to sign. They break the news to their current label, and the label manager says he wants them to succeed, so they have his blessing. He will need to be compensated, of course, but for the remaining albums left on their contract. But he'll work it out with the label himself. Sub Pop made millions from selling off Nirvana, and Twin Tone hasn't done bad either. 50 grand for the Babes and 60 grand for the Poster Children without having to sell a single additional record. It'll be something modest. The new label doesn't mind, so long as it's recoupable out of royalties. Well, they get the final contract, and it's not quite what they expected. They figure it's better to be safe than sorry, and they turn it over to a lawyer. One who says he's experienced in entertainment law, and he hammers out a few bugs. They're still not sure about it, but the lawyer says he's seen a lot of contracts and theirs is pretty good. There'll be great royalty, 30%, less a 10% package deduction. Wasn't it Buffalo Tom that were only getting 12% less than 10? Whatever. The old label only wants 50 grand and no points. Hell, Sub Pop got 3 points when they let Nirvana go. They signed for 4 years, with options on each year for a total of over $1 million. That's a lot of money in any man's English. The first year's advance alone is 250 grand. Just think about it, $250,000 just for being in a rock band. Their manager thinks it's a great deal, especially the large audience advance. Besides, he knows a publishing company that will take the band on if they get signed, and even give them an advance of 20 grand, so they'll be making that money too. Their manager says publishing is pretty mysterious, and nobody really knows where all the money comes from, but the lawyer could look the contract over. Hell, it's free money. Their booking agent is excited about the band signing to a major. He says they can average maybe 1,000 or 2,000 a night from now on. That's enough to justify a 5-week tour with tour support, and they can use a proper crew, buy some good equipment, and even get a tour bus. Buses are pretty expensive, but if you figure in the price of a hotel room for everyone in the band and the crew, they're actually about the same cost. Some bands like Therapy and Sloan and Stereolab use buses on their tours even when they're getting paid only a couple of $100 a night, and this tour should earn at least $1 grand or $2 every night. It'll be worth it. The band will be more comfortable and will play better. The agent says a band on a major label can get a merchandising company to pay them an advance on t-shirt sales. Ridiculous. There's a gold mine here. The lawyer should look over the merchandising contract just to be safe. They get drunk at the signing party. Polaroids are taken and everybody looks thrilled. The label picked them up in a limo. They decided to go with the producer who used to be in Letterman's band. He had these technicians come in and tune the drums for them and tweak their amps and guitars. He had a guy bring in a slew of expensive old vintage microphones. Boy, were they warm. He even had a guy come in and check the phase of all the equipment in the control room. Boy, was he professional. He used a bunch of equipment on them, and by the end of it, they all agreed that it sounded very punchy, yet warm. All that hard work paid off. With the help of a video, the album went like hotcakes. They sold 250,000 copies. Here is the math to explain just how fucked they are. These figures are representative of amounts that appear in record contracts daily. There's no need to skew the figures to make the scenario look bad, since real-life examples more than abound. Income is underlined, expenses are not. Advance, 250 grand. Manager's cut, 37,500. Legal fees, $10,000. Recording budget, $155,500. Producer's advance, $50,000. Studio fee, $52,000. Drum, amp, mic, and phase doctors, $3,000. Recording tape, $8,000. Equipment rental, $5,000. Cartage and transportation, $5,000. Lodging while in studio, $10,000. Catering, $3,000. Mastering, $10,000. Tape copies, reference CDs, shipping tapes, miscellaneous expenses, $2,000. Album artwork, $5,000. Promotional photo and duplication, $2,000. Video budget, $31,000. Cameras, $8,000. Crew, $5,000. Processing and transfers, $3,000. Offline, $2,000. Online editing, $3,000. Catering, $1,000. Stage and construction, $3,000. Copies, couriers and transportation, $2,000. Director's fee, $4,000. Band fund, $15,000. New fancy professional drum kit, $5,000. New fancy professional guitars, $3,000. New fancy professional guitar amp rigs, $4,000. New fancy potato-shaped bass guitar, $1,000. New fancy bass amp, $1,000. Rehearsal space rental, $500. Big blowout party for their friends, $500. Tour expense, 5 weeks, $50,875. Bus, $25,000. Crew, $7,500. Food and per diems, $7,875. Fuel, $3,000. Consumable supplies, $3,500. Wardrobe, $1,000. Promotion, $3,000. Tour gross income, $50,000. Booking agent's cut, $7,500. Manager's cut, $7,500. Merchandising advance, $20,000. Manager's cut, $3,000. Lawyer's fee, $1,000. Publishing advance, $20,000. Manager's cut, $3,000. Lawyer's fee, $1,000. Record sales, $250,000 at $12 each. $3 million. Gross retail revenue, royalty, 13% of 90% of retail, $250,000 at $12 equals $351,000. Less advance, $250,000. Producers points, 3% less, $50,000 advance, $40,000. Promotional budget, $25,000. Recoupable buyout from previous label, $50,000. Net royalty, $14,000. Now, on the other hand, let's look at the record company income. Record wholesale price, $6.50 times $250,000 equals $1,625,000 gross income. Artist royalties, $351,000. Deficit from royalties, $14,000. Costs of manufacturing, packaging and distribution, $2.20 per record. $550,000. Labels gross profit, $710,000. The balance sheet. This is how much each player got paid at the end of the game. Record company, $710,000. Producer, $90,000. Manager, $51,000. Studio, $52,000, $52,500. Previous label, $50,000. Booking agent, $7,500. Lawyer, $12,000. Band member net income each, $781.25. The band is now a quarter of the way through its contract, has made the music industry more than $3 million richer, but is in the hole $14,000 on royalties. The band members have each earned about a 20th as much as they would be working at a 7-Eleven, but they got to ride in a tour bus for a month. The next album will be about the same, except that the record company will insist they spend more time and money on it. Since the previous one never recouped, the band will have no leverage and will oblige. The next tour will be about the same, except the merchandising advance will already have been paid, and the band, strangely enough, won't have earned any royalties from their t-shirts yet. Maybe the t-shirt guys have figured out how to count money like record company guys. Some of your friends are probably already this fucked.